All right, I want to hit you with a couple of things first because it came together in like, so you can hear me okay, right? There's not a lot of static in the background or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit you with a couple of things first because it came up honestly while you were out for the past hour. Everything's kind of coming together. So
Oh, word.
what I want to talk about here is, I think specifically, I'll just kind of lay it out with the chart real quick. Karmic relationship dynamics that are ingrained deep into the psyche as an unconscious relationship dynamics here. Sorry, South Node, Venus, Sun, Mercury, that are being unconsciously communicated, actually forming the constellation of the self. And these are constantly being projected out into the world in terms of our relationships with others and our relationships with ourselves. And so I want to talk like specifically, there's like a couple of different terms. I'm going to use some psychology, like stuff like limerence and I don't know, like covert emotional incest. There are these things, right, that psychologists use just terminology to describe the way that we form our relationship patterns, our attachment styles, all of these different things that constellate around these dynamics. And this will go back to the Aries full moon video that we did around
Yeah.
meeting other people, specifically one-on-one relationships here is what we're talking about. With our Venus and Taurus, kind of Scorpio Taurus axis. This is the two becoming one, unified in Scorpio, birthing the third, which is the relationship, how these relationship constellations occur and why. And so these are things that often are buried deep in the somatic consciousness, right? Even the consciousness of the body in terms of how we internalized our relationships growing up, particularly with our parents, as well as traumatic situations and relationships we've been in as adults. So, right, this is our mode and way of relating to others. And this is often something that you take on early in life as a role. Let's say you had to act as a caregiver, or you even had to act as an emotional spouse to a parent.
Mm-hmm.
That's what covert emotional incest is for anyone who's listening, right? You basically have to act as a spouse to one of the parents because they're not getting their emotional or even physical needs met from the other from the actual spouse in the relationship. So these are psychological and somatic dynamics that take form very early in life for children, to the point of which you may not have any conscious, very little, if any, conscious memories of the constellating events which form these personalities that you carry with you, or these roles. But nonetheless, you carry them into your adult life and form relationships and have patterns, such as stuff like limerence, which I think is really interesting. We were talking about Dante and Beatrice. That's how some psychologists have described Dante's relationship with Beatrice. There's these meetings that happen where, in one way or another, the person that you meet becomes a limerence object, right? They become an object of desire, and the feeling of desire is intense, and it's not love, and it might not even necessarily be lust, but it's this desire to merge with the limerence object, because in one way or another, this person, in their appearance, their behavior, represents a sort of missing piece or an unconscious element of the psyche, which it is desperately trying to reclaim in order to become whole again. So this dynamic is very much so up in this eclipse portal, and I would say this is what's coming up. I think the solar eclipse was bringing it to bear, and it's been growing throughout this the first quarter and going into the full moon lunar eclipse aspect of this. But this is something that is very up for grabs right now. I think particularly, again, with Venus, Sun, and Mercury on the South Node in Scorpio. Scorpio is, again, the relationship axis, the axis of possession, the axis of jealousy, where is the seventh house of relationships. Sorry, what?
As you just cut out for a sec.
Oh, where did it cut out?
As you were explaining all the things connected to Venus.
Yeah. So, right, Venus rules, again, Libra and Taurus. Libra is the seventh house, which is the house of relationships, particularly one-on-one relationships. But then if we're looking at the astrology chart, obviously all of these things move in a natural progression. We move into Scorpio, where the relationship becomes this sort of higher state of unification. The relationship itself becomes an entity. We move from the one-on-one relationship into the, whatever it is, the orgasmic or ecstatic unity, which produces the third element, or the element of the two becoming one. If you just look at the triangle that I'm drawing here, here's the two becoming one in the third element. So this is something that I think is really fascinating when we're talking about merging, again, is something that's very Scorpio. And this is a hard thing to deal with, because obviously we are dealing with, at this point in time in history, a very damaged and fractured society. So a lot of psychologists say things like limerence occur because people are so lonely and alienated that they come across someone that they want to merge with or desire to have a relationship with, and these very, very intense emotions that have been sitting beneath the surface emerge and become constellated in the limerence object. This also, I mean, I think has to do a lot with exploitation and manipulation and abuse in relationships, right? Using relationships as the axis or focal point for power and desire. Again, all of the stuff with Scorpio again is sexuality and desire. This is all the Plutonic that comes into the kind of the Libra and Venus one-on-one relationship constellation here. So these are things that I've just kind of been piecing together, and I think it's all kind of finally constellating here now. But I guess those are my opening remarks.
Okay. So some of the things that came to me, just regarding like the energy and how it's playing out, like it really kind of hit me on Saturday, figuring out exactly how this will affect me. So as you're saying with, Venus, we're kind of in this realm of the feminine and the feminine energy right now, right? And I was thinking along the lines of how relationships have played out like with women. So specific, like friendships, right? Sisterhood, this idea of sisterhood, and how we can see this kind of the same dynamic going on, within the masculine realm of those in power who want to hold on to power and not let go of that power, right? So sometimes there's an undercutting that can happen of those coming up behind them. And it's like so many don't realize that, or maybe they just haven't, I don't know, thought deeply about it. But I mean, there's basically two arenas of life that every single human goes through, and that's birth and death. Everybody gets born, and everybody dies, right? So it's like whatever you're working on, the point is to create some type of legacy and to pass that on. But there seems to be a dynamic in place on both the masculine and the feminine realm where those who have power want to hold on to power, and they're not looking beyond the fact that them not being in power is a loss to them. They're not looking at the fact that you can't pass on your legacy if you don't mentor those who are coming up behind you, right? So in terms of like the feminine arena of like this whole maiden, mother, and crone, this is something that I recognize is not necessarily being talked about within the feminine sphere. We see this a lot in politics, especially when it's in regards to those that identify as men. But when it comes to like some of the, I don't know, I guess the attitudes or the perceptions that older women tend to have towards younger women, and how that undercutting process seems to be a lot more prevalent, I feel like, in that feminine dynamic, and how that actually is kind of playing out right now in the chart. So like, along with us all needing to examine those one-to-one, relationships and friendships, however they may, fall for you, looking at, are you doing your due diligence to make sure that that legacy continues? Or are you participating in plutocracy because of the fear of loss of power?
Well,
so that's effectively what came up to me.
Let me piggyback off of that, because I think we're talking about the same thing. The covert emotional incest, that's my big keyword for this. If you want to, if we're talking about Scorpio or the Taurus lunar eclipse in November 8th, 2022, covert emotional incest, because that's really what you're talking about. I think, especially with the maiden, mother, crone, when it's unhealed in a society, is that really what we're coming back to is sexual jealousy.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
exactly. Right. It's kind of a weird thing to say, right? But one of the big key themes in covert emotional incest, particularly with a narcissistic tint or angle, is that child is really being used as a locus for unrealized or unexpressed sexual desire or taboo sexual desire. So the reason why the term covert emotional incest is used, it's not that the physical act of incest is actually being committed, although obviously you can have situations of covert emotional incest which also have actual physical incest as elements and components of that covert emotional incest in relationship, but that the covert emotional incest is actually a locus for that the spousal desire or lack thereof that is being projected onto the child as a taboo object of the fulfillment or realization of that desire. And we can extend that into what you're talking about right now with the maiden mother crone situation. And I would say, insofar as elders are concerned in our society, I guess we go back to the Pluto thing, and Saturn is obviously part of that, where the elders in our society are really children, right? I mean, like, there's no, we don't have elders in this society, right? As opposed to, I think, a lot of ancient societies and civilizations, I'm sure, as part of your heritage and as part of mine, that were actually elders in a spiritual sense, right? And that actually did have wisdom to hand down to the younger generations. I don't know about you, but my the elders in my family have massively undiagnosed and unresolved mental illness and trauma and whatever else that has just basically left them as like shells of whatever or whoever they possibly ever could have been. And they're fighting for the scraps of whatever they could possibly obtain for themselves. And I mean, again, I think that extends to your thesis on the feminine, and obviously it's a big thing with the masculine, but I think that with the feminine, right, there's this constellation here. This is interesting. I heard one of my favorite astrologers, I'll give her a shout out, Adrienne Elise, was talking about this opposition here between Black Moon Lilith and Pluto for the next couple of months. But Lilith swings pretty wildly, because this is not mean Lilith. This is the actual Lilith on here, unfortunately. If it's a mean one, it would be a lot more stable. But this opposition here, no, you're good. You're good. This opposition here is actually going to be in a grand water trine here as we move over the next couple of weeks. It is also obviously in direct opposition to Pluto, as well as this eclipse point here. So there's a big relationship. She was saying it's a kite. I don't want to get too much into the what the aspects, because I know some people on here aren't going to know that kind of stuff. But this is a huge thing that's up, I think, right now for this eclipse. And what you're talking about and what I'm talking about, to me, are the same thing.
Yeah, it definitely the same thing. And I will just say that most of the elders, I would say, in my family have passed on, but looking back, of course, hindsight's almost always 2020, right? Like, it's the same thing, that they're effectively a shell of who they could have been, regardless if that was poor life choices or just situational, decisions that had to be made on the fly, that unrealized potential that can sometimes be subtly manipulated onto the younger generation to like carry that out, which is completely different than mentoring someone to help carry out a legacy. At least that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. So just going off of that, right? The Saturn-Uranus square, right? That's been in effect for the past year and a half. If I'm going off the charts, this has really been the first time that the South Node has been seriously impacted and aspected in light of this square, right? So we're kind of having this perfect storm of this eclipse season where obviously the nodes are coming in, North Node coming into conjunct Uranus and South Node coming into square Saturn, North Node coming into square Saturn. We're having this really perfect storm where these themes for the past year and a half in terms of these Saturn structures and in terms of community and collective are coming to light in relation to the Uranian structures of the kind of the lack of structures, so to speak, of shaking the ground and these kind of insights from spirit that are coming down into the body that we're having to integrate. And I think a large part of that has to do with the fact that we are our own elders right now, right? Like, I mean, people like us, or people like me and you, I don't want to speak for you, but I'll speak for myself, is that I don't know. I don't have that. There's no kind of ancient wisdom that's coming down in my culture, in my society, in my community, even in my family. All this stuff for me is fourth house for Scorpio. So it's going to be tinted with a little bit of the family when I'm speaking, but this is still a huge collective theme for me. Even in my family that I have the wisdom to look up to, I feel like I'm dealing with, for the most part, with children, right? Children who are 40, 50, 80, 90 years old or whatever, right? So on that kind of spiritual journey, right, it's like we're coming across these things that I think are very, very dark, right? Something like covert emotional incest. There are people who have gone through significant trauma as children. It's something that I identify with, but I don't think it ever got so extreme, right? My parents are pretty conscious people, but they still have a lot of unresolved trauma and a lot of unresolved
Mhm.
abuse in their own childhoods. But there are a lot of people who've gone through significant abuse, particularly in terms of their relationships, their self-image, and the way that they're actually able to communicate and realize themselves, not only in terms of society, but in terms of their own um, just self-nature, right? And being themselves. They've had to take on these roles or these disguises just to survive. And I think what we're seeing here is a kind of a huge bloom of that deeply repressed energy, which does come a lot of the time back to stuff like sexual jealousy and sexual envy, the desire to repress or harness other people's power for your own needs and desires, right? And even people who have gone a significant way down this spiritual path, right? I see that in myself all the time, and I'm not saying that I'm some sort of like genius or master or anything, right? But like these are things that we have to examine because they are up to be examined right now with this full moon lunar eclipse. And if we do, there's the opportunity, I think, for some pretty significant psychological, spiritual, and even somatic growth in terms of how we're able to be in our bodies and come into a place of greater self-sovereignty and to feel safe within ourselves.
Yeah. And it's similar in my family, but I feel like there's more almost like a preventative effect of moving forward because they're still reliving the trauma because they haven't examined it. So it's almost this feedback loop.
Yep.
They,
Yeah, like
can't see the
Groundhog
forest
Day.
for the trees type of thing.
Groundhog Day. Mars square Neptune.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Just the same thing happening over and over again on repeat. And we're asking, like, why are we stuck here? Like, why are we in this place? And there is, right, with Venus, it's like Venus is the attractor in our personal lives, right? And if we have unresolved Venus wounds, what it's going to be is we're continually, and I think particularly with Scorpio, drawing back in these kind of Scorpio conjunct the South Node kind of karmic themes around sexual jealousy and possession and repression and these dynamics that continue to play out on a feedback loop. That's very South Node to me, right? It's this karma that keeps reappearing that we haven't integrated because we haven't done that deeper Scorpio looking and investigation into these places of trauma, or maybe we haven't known how to, right? Things like therapy and psychology are very, very Scorpionic, right? It's like we're digging into this place and we're doing this work in order to heal the Venus, right? And as Venus goes into the third decan here, she's about to do, I think actually on the day of the eclipse. Yeah, there you go. Right. This is the kind of, right, if we're going through the Scorpion, the Eagle, and the Phoenix, right? This is Venus rising here out of the depths and being born again and transformed. So there is this possibility here. I'm not saying it's gonna be for everyone, obviously, right? But like, if you do this work, right, the journey of Venus through Scorpio is to go into the depths here, and obviously with the South Node, that's even more emphasized, to go into the depths of these karmic sexual repressions and themes of sexual desire, manipulation, possession, and to emerge out of them with going into Sagittarius, the kind of newfound knowledge and perspective to reflect upon this larger kind of paradigm that's taking place that I think you're talking about as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it was interesting the way that this kind of hit. Like, so I ended up taking on an account where it's involved in like just the environmental kind of umbrella, and that's like what I spent most of my adult life pursuing because that's the field of work that I wanted to be in. And I just kind of had this realization about like the amount of passion that someone who hasn't been tainted by that process of trying to get into, a male dominated industry, um, how that passion can go away. And so like being reintroduced to some of these topics and being able to like talk about these topics as I was sitting with it on Saturday, realizing that inner flame that was once there, that phoenix, if you will, wasn't. But realizing that I'm being put in this position because I do still have an ability to mentor those who are coming up behind me that haven't had that experience yet. So it's almost like with this idea of our elders being, a teacher, because patterns do tend to repeat themselves, in human history. I mean, we don't even have to look back that far to even find this, right? And so if you're in the position where you've already walked that path and you are by choice refusing to share that information and are choosing to gatekeep to prevent success from those who are coming from underneath you, like that's like Venus shadow to me, right?
Yeah.
That's talking about again, that the plutocracy, the need for power, the fear of the loss of power. And it's like you gain more power when you share what you know. I mean, if we're really like looking at it for power's sake, right? So it doesn't make sense to gatekeep information, opportunities, and even lessons, the hard lessons, like we learn through discomfort. So to pretend like everything's okay, that nothing bad ever happens, that the entire path was just super easy and you were skipping, it's bullshit. You know, it's a lie. And I feel like this is a lie that's been perpetuated. And we're literally seeing this play out right now in the political atmosphere, which is terrifying enough on its own. But it's really interesting how this is all just kind of like how the events that have played out since we did that last video have kind of lined up with this energy.
Yeah. I mean, the realization here, I mean, whoever gets to it soonest is by no means the winner or anything, right? Is that, I mean,
Right.
like, we don't have anything. We're not, whatever you're holding on to is an illusion, right? And whatever you think you're holding on to is ultimately an illusion. And it's like,
Right.
I mean, the Pluto movement into Aquarius, this is kind of it's going to be the last, right? We're still on that Pluto return that we've been talking about. So, like, I mean, yeah, I would say give it time for these people, right? Because it's like whether or not they realize it now, whatever they're holding on to is leaving. And I mean, I think that's why they're holding on to it. It's like the white knuckle kind of like grasp where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I'm going to hold on to this so tightly because I can feel it slipping away. And I mean, I've been doing it too. And my like I think personal relationships have been like a huge kind of locus for that, right? Like these things that with the Saturn Uranus square, right? It's been for a year and a half. You can kind of feel them. It's that was the glacial theme that was brought up. I was like, okay, this is like this very glacial shift that's been happening, but this is definitely a crack in the ice, if you will, right? I mean, you could talk about it
Yeah.
environmental metaphorically. It's a huge crack in the ice, and we're hearing it again, right? Getting the moon here and the full moon on the north node. You got Mercury conjunct the south node. We're hearing it, and it's not pretty. And it's
No.
definitely something that is very, very emotional, right? And is very close to people's hearts. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of this stuff is coming from a place of the desire to love and the desire to have compassion. And I think holding that space and holding that knowledge is important right now. It's hard, but it's important because you can see the distortions and you can see the wounds in these self-conceptions and the way that people's relationships and values are distorted and playing out in the field right now. That's the T-square.
Mm-hmm.
Between the lunar eclipse and Saturn, you can see these distortions, but to understand where they're coming from, I think is another order of magnitude. And I think that's kind of our work right now, is to hold that space of love and compassion and to understand that, right, these karmic themes that people are working out that do seem very dark, right, and they do seem kind of almost hopelessly based around power. Is that to work out these karmic themes is the work that all of us are doing. And in the process of working them out, we all come to the realization ultimately that they're these illusions, right? And this is again a super Mars square Neptune thing for me, right? Mars is going to come back around over the next, I think even over the next week. It's really quick. Yeah, the next
Mm-hmm.
week, and come back to the exact square in the retrograde with both Mars and Neptune retrograde. This is something that's playing out very esoterically. This is something that I think we're feeling it. We're feeling the Neptunian fog and trying to find a way to navigate through it. Mars isn't really going anywhere in an exoteric sense, but this is an inner journey that's happening and is going to continue to happen up to and through the new year. Again, right, the theme that's playing out in the background of this eclipse, which really is the foreground, but you know, whatever. That's gonna be interesting. Because it's this right now to me is about tuning in. This is something that's really happening in the inner world. And I mean, we can't control how other people are playing out these dynamics in the social or political sphere, right? And I mean, I hope people figure it out, right? And I hope people do that inner work. And it's like part of them playing out these karmic dynamics is that work, right? And that work is emerging, and there are going to be points of realization, and this work is going to appear and to do it, right? But this is something that I think if we're tuning in and really listening right now, we can start to develop more significant kind of layers and depths of understanding than we previously had, particularly regarding, again, these dynamics that we just discussed in Taurus and Scorpio.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That was actually like, I got a download about that, about this similar thing, just about how you're speaking and what you're saying, and what is the, what is your intent on saying what you're saying, and what is the impact, more importantly, of what you were saying. Like, are you speaking out of anger, or are you being grounded when you're choosing to express yourself? And I think that the more people that are cognizant of that, the better off that they'll be as these energies continue to play out over the next 6 months.
Yep. Mars and Gemini, mutual reception with Mercury and Scorpio. Again, right? Mars rules Scorpio, Mercury, Gemini. Conjunct the South Node. If we're paying attention to these dynamics as they play out, and again, Mars and Gemini is, okay, how are we communicating? Am I communicating from a place of just like emotional outbursts, or am I thinking twice?
Right.
So Mars thinking twice about what I'm saying or doing or communicating, right? If I'm taking that time and space to analyze, and it's difficult, especially with the karmic dynamics that emerge during eclipse season, because it's like, these are things that are going to, again, moon conjunct North Node and moon conjunct South Node on the solar and lunar eclipses. These are things that are going to be necessarily kind of emotionally intense. If we can create that space to be in observer mode and kind of witness mode, which is super Saturn and Aquarius, taking a step back and viewing the stadium and viewing the play as it plays out in the cosmic sense, if we can take that step back and really give ourselves the agency of giving it a second look and taking a second to respond, that's ideal right now. I mean, obviously, right, it's kind of going to be, it is what it is during eclipse season, but like the more that you can tune into that frequency of the self-awareness and analyzing these karmic dynamics as they emerge, the more you're going to take away from this eclipse season and the more you're going to learn. I mean, I'd love to say, right, if I was going to be like one of the like shock jock, like pop astrologer kind of vibes, like this eclipse is going to change everything. Like this eclipse is going to like blow up the world forever. Like 1,000 likes, click this. Like, but it's just like, it's not really like, this is something that is a part of obviously a larger esoteric process of self-realization, self-understanding, which never ends, right? You could be the most self-realized person in the world and you'd still be uncovering deeper layers and levels of these dynamics. And that's what we're here for, right? That's like the human journey. And being open to that is important. I think it's easy to, I've seen myself doing this, it's kind of contract in these energies, the Scorpio kind of shrinking away to go like under the rock, right? And just like hiss, I mean, that's like, it's just like, I mean, I've seen myself doing that, and it's just like trying to remain open, right? And feeling these kind of karmic takings of the ground and feeling the emotional intensity and just being like, this is part of the journey, this is part of the process, and kind of enjoying that and feeling that as a part of this larger kind of cycle of turnings of nature, if you will.
Yeah, I'd even be quick to say, like, if you're in a position where those deeper reflections aren't coming, then you're probably not in that state of presence and observer mode. And that alone is something to ponder on, I suppose, as to why you're not present. Because I feel like, especially when we're speaking about, I mean, I don't know anything, just speaking in general, that we're speaking to speak, not to listen, not for actual discourse, not to actually learn anything. Some people, they just like to hear their own voice. And within that, there is a lack of presence that is occurring that I think a lot of people miss.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how this plays out. Like, I can remember thinking just back a couple weeks ago, like, yeah, I'm Gucci, nothing's going on. Like, I'm so chill right now. Thinking, okay, this is totally going to bypass me, right? Which, required me to do my own reflection and look a little deeper beyond the surface and to make sure that I was present, as these things were playing out, because it could have just been easily on Saturday, hey, yeah, I'm doing this event. Yeah, it's regarding this. I'll do my job and get out. But because I decided to look a little deeper with the undercurrents and what had kind of brought me to this moment, I was able to actually connect that, okay, this is a little bit of a karmic lesson for me. You know what I mean? So like doing that deeper introspection is going to go a long way if you can allow yourself the space to do that.
Yeah, being able to tune in and kind of even just understanding in like the little moments, like what you're thinking and what you're feeling are part of like this larger movement. Again, right? Going back to stuff like the childhood psychology and things like that and relationship psychology. It's like these are not things that appear out of a vacuum, right? These are like these are learned skills and learned behaviors that emerge and become relationship dynamics that are and often remain unconscious, right? And so we could continue to move through life with those unconscious relationship dynamics playing out, right? Particularly in terms of as they relate to power, sexuality, or whatever it is, right? Or we could instead attempt to make those relationship dynamics and kind of power dynamics conscious. It's
Right.
was the young thing, like if you don't make the unconscious conscious, you will call it fate and it will be your master or something, right? That's super
Yeah.
super solid Scorpio type of vibe. I mean, it's just like the doing the work isn't like it's not like you wake up and you're like, I don't know, it's like the whole like manifestation thing or whatever. Like it's like we're tuning into these psychological dynamics and we're analyzing them and we're coming to deeper understandings of them because of the things that are coming about in the material world and on the ground and in every day, right? It's like this is the relationship between Taurus and Scorpio. These are the things that this is like the ground, this is the earth, these are the place, this is the place where these themes are playing out. But then we have this inner, like the exoteric, so to speak, with Taurus and the esoteric with Scorpio, where these themes are playing out on a stage, right? All the world's a stage, all the men and women are but players, the Shakespeare thing. That these are the psychological dynamics that are playing out on the stage. And if we can tune into that, you kind of have a different meaning and a different approach to life. That is, I think I would say a lot more empowering and a lot more based around this kind of this perspective of soul evolution. But I wrote something earlier. It was just like this quick thing. It was like life and love are like a play of the evolution of the soul or something like that. And kind of seeing it, the kind of Mars and Gemini thing. It's like not necessarily as a game, but as a game, right? It's like these are karmic dynamics that are coming up so we can learn more about that which we truly and essentially are, right? And being open to that as opposed to contracting out of fear, right? Like all that we're learning here and all that's going on is we're just learning more about who we are and what we are and what we want and what our souls want in this lifetime, right? And in however amount of time, XYZ, whatever, right? So it's like being open to that takes, I think, a little bit of that eagle phoenix part of the Scorpio, where it's like this transformation is for my higher good, right? Like I'm going through this transformation so I can see in a more expansive, broader, more open, more loving, and more kind way. And that's hard to do when the ground of your life or your personality or your character or whatever gets shaken by an emerging karmic dynamic, which is definitely this eclipse season, right? I would wonder if over the past 2 weeks there hasn't been some sort of karmic dynamic that's emerged to be played out on the stage for most people. And so in that, right, it's difficult to maintain because the ground is shaking, the earth is shaking, and we're feeling this, and it's very emotional and it's intense, and there's a lot that's up in the personal realm for significant change in perspective. But to hold that space and say, okay, this is something that's playing out for the higher good of the growth of my soul is, I think, a very empowering place to be.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, honestly, that's all I have to say about this. I don't think right. I think this is a really simple thing that's going on. It doesn't, I mean, not simple, but it's like the way it's playing out archetypally, I think, is very clear.
Yeah, it's very straightforward.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about it in other episodes too. So I don't think I have no need to beat a dead horse necessarily over over the transits. Do you want to go into some of the tarot?
Yeah, I can pull out some tarot and see what else we get.
Nice.
Because I know we've had some repeating themes so far with this deck. And like another thing I was thinking about too from the last video, I remember it was something about a chef. And it was talking about like the gluttony of
Oh,
that's
yeah.
really kind of Thanksgiving. One thing I actually thought of later that would affect all of that is water. And I do believe that, especially now with the Southern Hemisphere getting ready to head into their spring and summer, that we're going to start to hear a little bit more about water crises. Yeah, it's one of the things that I learned, you know, as a student in that whole environmental realm, is that it's not that wars will necessarily be fought over like political boundaries or political beliefs or anything, but we will likely in our lifetime see wars fought over water. And I kind of feel like this is the inception of that based on what's kind of been going on. So, oh yeah, and indolence came out again. How about apples? So 8 of Cups came out again. Let me actually start from the beginning here. Okay, so we got the Ace of Cups, which is, you can say love. I tend to look at it as like divine love or communication from the divine or your higher self, depending on how you like to view that or call that. And then we've got the 3 of Pentacles, which is pretty exclusively a card about finances and work. It stands for works in this deck. And then we've got Victory, which is the 6 of Wands. And then Indolence again, which is the 8 of Cups. So this is interesting. Bottom of the deck is failure. So I definitely think that this is one of those crossroads points for people, where your success or quote unquote failure has to do with your connection to the divine. And this is one of the things that I mentioned in the channeled message that I got, where it's a lot easier to hear the whisper of, you know, your higher self and the divine if your mouth is closed. And a lot of people, I feel like, are a bit detached, you know, from those higher perspectives because they're talking the talk and not necessarily communicate anything. Again, depends on the person, depends on where you are. Yeah. So the economy, for sure, we're going to see something popping out about that, or I should say something more popping out about that. In my news scrolls, I've noticed that there is a lot more talk about trying to take a picture and not get my habanero sauce in it. That there's a lot more conversation about, okay, well, the economy is about to turn. We're about to head into the recession. I've been seeing a lot of stuff about, of course, all the shit with Twitter and Elon Musk and all that stuff. But probably the most surprising, but not surprising, was the one of how so many tech companies are in preparation to start laying people off this week and heading into the holiday season. And just how the gluttony of the holidays that we're heading into is just, it's almost kind of polarizing. Like, here are these holidays that we tend to celebrate with excess when we're really in a time of I don't want to say need, but when that excess isn't actually available to take advantage of. So kind of getting your priorities in order about what you spend your money on, and what you're consuming, what you consider to be a victory, and more importantly, learning to sit in silence and be okay with that, I think, are probably the best tips that I can give based on what's come up.
Yeah, so I would go off of that, and I think austerity is maybe a good word, right? I'm not super interested in like partitioning it out. I just think austerity from like a spiritual perspective, right? That obviously goes into multiple different like layers and sectors of life. But like this is definitely a time to be in reflection on, as you said, like how and what and why you're doing and consuming, and to be in a place, I think, of deeper psychological analysis, which is necessarily going to involve you kind of turning that, like the chattering mind off and going
Mm-hmm.
more into reflection on how and why these dynamics are emerging, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be what it is, I think.
Yeah, so I just put up a quick picture of the cards so y'all can see them. And again, just kind of like I'm talking about, like, tuning into the divine and basically buckling down on your work and finances, and what you're investing to is what is more likely to bring victory. However, if you participate in this indolence and this gluttony, that's when the failure is more likely to appear. So it's literally a split. It's a crossroads for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, I think there's this higher will and lower will thing, which is definitely Mars square Neptune. If we're tuning in to the higher will and aligning our quote unquote lower will, which is just our will with the higher will, that's going to be, I think, a good place to be. And you can't really do that without just kind of turning off all of this stuff about your persona and like who you think you are and what you think you're supposed to be doing. These eclipse periods are totally a time to really tune in and listen to that higher will.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, that said, I don't have anything else. How about you?
I think that's it.
All right. That's it, y'all. See you next time.